polka bar once. Very strange. Although I did learn that it's possible to have, what was it? This woman had earrings that lit up. They had little lights in her earrings. That's what I remember anyway from the night. Pretty weird. Oh, that was a hell of a thing to admit in live stream. Hello, everyone. It's the 26th of December, and welcome to Dis and Dat. Welcome to Boxing Day. It's Boxing Day. Well, a question I wanted to ask about was, we're going to head back more towards eco-socialism. There's plenty of stuff there, certainly. I put up two things on a discussion about whether bees have value, and it not quite as fruitful as one might think, although it's an interesting question. The problem, of course, is one that generally applies in Marxism. That is, can you generalize from certain ideas? Does nature produce? Is there production in nature? And suppose that's so. The question is, I suppose there's a product of surplus value if you think about how beehives operate. They do operate in some bee contexts, that is, honeybees, more specifically, with a kind of surplus that occurs only because, in the production side, that is production for humans, you can see that hives are done for that in that way. But even in the non-human intervention, surplus is made. But it is a sustenance kind of thing that they make it in order to let the next generation of larvae, whatever, survive. So it's not really a surplus in that sense. It's really just a basic accumulation. So I included that, even though it's probably a little obtuse, and a response by David Schwartzman to that. But I put probably a much better thing that it projects the idea of why the world needs eco-socialism. And since I've used up a little bit of my time, I'll just repeat it, since it's, or not repeat it, but I mean, replicate it, because I think it's generally where we should go. And does raise the question about building radical movements by Max Agel. And there's a general set of documents that come from the last recent, only a couple of weeks ago, Ecosocialism conference in England. And not that people like me could show up for the darn thing, but it did occur. Climate change affects everyone, but it does not affect everyone the same way. It hammers a capitalist world rampant with inequality and exploitation. This is the case because capitalism neither exploits nor develops evenly. Some nation states are centers for accumulating wealth and development. Some nation states are peripheries and are underdeveloped. Development and underdevelopment are two sides of the same process, accumulation on a world scale. Climate change, in turn, is a human-made process, a product and accelerator of uneven accumulation. Because it is human-made, some states, as well as some within those states, are more responsible than others. And the very poorest simply bear no culpability at all. Yet those least culpable, Bangladesh, Yemen, Haiti, are those which will suffer most in a warming world. Drought, typhoon, and flooding have and will burst across the South with far more ferocity and frequency than across the North. Climate injustice is thus part of the story of uneven capitalist accumulation. Climate change is the child of fossil-fueled capitalist industrialization. While in principle, industrialization is a distinct process from capitalism and imperialism, in history, it has moved hand in hand with them, each whirl in a destructive spiral. Industrialization especially provides the engines of war and contributes to making life easier for many, especially, but not only in the South, allowing it to freely devastate the ecologies and states of the South. Where does that leave us? We need global ecosocialism. Such a system would be marked by global developmental convergence. Just about everyone, and in particular every state, would have roughly equivalent access to development, or the good life. Such a system would necessarily be modern, with complex exchanges of goods. It would be industrial, but a controlled industrialization, because industrialization is a tool. It is a means, not an end. And it would be ecological. It would, in general, not produce waste beyond human natural capacity to remediate, and it would work towards the restoration of the ecology. So where does that leave us? Here is where accumulation on a world scale comes in. It reminds us that different nations have distinct class structures, implying different political burdens, differentiated responsibilities, and different paths towards world developmental convergence. Southern countries need political space to carry out independent development, including independent and sovereign industrialization without Northern interference based on their own balances and values, probably through regional economic unions and with a strong emphasis on the agrarian question. Such thinking has taproots in figures and formations like Simon Bolivar, Hugo Chavez, strains of Pan-Africanism, and Pan-Arab radical movements and parties, of which I read one yesterday. National agrarian systems need land to the tiller, agrarian reform, cooperativization where possible, and help from industry via the technical upgrading of agriculture. Ecologically sustainable forms of pastoralism and integrated livestock on farms would be important too, as hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people rely on them for securing some part of their needs. Agroecology, or the application of scientific procedures to understand the logic of and attempt to assist traditional agriculture, and more broadly, sustainable land management are important too. Through these policies, the South could better protect its ecology, enhance biodiversity outcomes through a sensitive blurring of hardened spatial boundaries between human and non-human nature and the countryside, and mobilize a surplus from agriculture for domestic industrialization and infrastructure investment. Such similar goals are important for the North. There, some sectors like industrialized petrochemical farming and ranching and confined feeding operations alongside the petroleum industry, drill baby drill, would need to be eliminated or degrow. Other sectors like ecological agriculture and processing of wood from sustainable forestry would need to grow, and we need massive investment far above World War II levels to shift UN industrial plants to the production of insulation, renewables for South and North, and infrastructure like mass transit systems to replace the massive waste of private transport. How we get there? We cannot think about economic and technological architecture without thinking about politics. Internationalism in support of national self-determination and national liberation for the South. Strong mobilization against sanctions on Iran and Zimbabwe and Syria. Note that this was written before the revolution, and against the U.S. war on Yemen, are inseparable from the climate question. They are the precondition for its just resolution. Reparations on terms dictated by the South and defended by Northern comrades are part of this process. The financial mechanism must respect the sovereign control of each country to determine the definition, design, implementation of policy, and programmatic approaches to climate change, as stated in the Cochabamba People's Agreement Working Group. It must total 6% of Northern GNP per year, around $3.2 trillion. And it must work alongside a totally renovated notion of technology transfer based on building up sovereign technological capacity, especially preventing intellectual property, quote unquote, from being used towards private or imperial state profits. How to get there? Political strategies diverge wildly. A popular narrative has been that electoral insurgencies within or without the historical social democratic or slightly more working class parties, is capable of delivering the kind of massive infrastructure spending capable of averting climate change. Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn, Syriza, each has either been immolated by capital or surrendered in its face. In their wake, the electoral route to eco-socialism rests supposedly on a future congressional majority pushing it through. Well, that's over. By the hands of U.S. figures like Jamal Bowman and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. In fact, this is a recipe for disaster. No social movement or political party has ever implemented its full program when in office, and the electoral route to social democracy in the North seems plausible sometime after the planet has turned to Venus and Yemen is a graveyard. Moreover, the 1945 to 1970 Golden Age, or Labor Capital Social Pact, occurred only against the capitalist democracy's fear of the domestic popularity of communism. The capitalist parties gave bread and butter to some, although not black people, domestically, and the bread and butter to and guns abroad, incinerating social democratic, radical nationalist, or communist parties in an arc of terror from southern Latin America to the Arab region to Africa to Indonesia. What is the alternative? A radical movement of movements, what Paris Yeros has called a new Bandung, capable of weaving together radicalized states, anti-capitalist social movements, and independent anti-imperialist parties and movements in the North within a new common front that can offer accountable strength, succor, and that which can add as mooring point for Northern radicals seeking to break from the gravity of imperialist social democracy. Now, whether this is indeed possible is the question of the day. And the second thing I wanted to read about was an eco-socialist program, a first take. It's from a journal called Climate Vanguard, and pretty recent. That is from last year. Standing on the cusp of the 1.5 degree centigrade guardrail with emissions rising and nature vanishing, our task is to uproot capitalism and plant the seeds of eco-socialism. In other words, execute system change to avoid climate and ecological collapse. Fulfilling this task requires rupture from capitalism. We cannot rapidly transform society through bourgeois electoral systems or incremental reforms, nor can we build isolated alternatives while the world crumbles. The task is to face the system head on and win. The primary responsibility of the climate movement is to undertake realistic, principled actions to lead an eco-socialist mass movement with the collective capacity for ruptural transformation. With this context in mind, we present a program that outlines the policies to be implemented upon gaining power. This vision serves as a potent mobilization tool, compelling the masses to step into action and organize for revolution. To narrow the scope, this program is specifically directed at the European context, with the exclusion of Russia, which necessitates a more tailored approach. Even within the narrow geography, we recognize that it makes large generalizations that don't fully account for sub-region particularities. This program should not be read as prescriptive, but suggestive of the author's vision alone. It is merely an initial probe that should be critically analyzed and updated through feedback from the movement. Moving through three central themes, more Ds: democratize, decommodify, decolonize. This program offers a vision of society in transition, a society still wrestling with the capitalist scars of the old world while negotiating the emancipatory potential of the new. But it is a world of liberation and material improvement for the majority, all nested within planetary boundaries. So recalling Lenin, in revolutionary times, the limits of what is possible expand 1,000-fold. So, first D, democratize the means of production. Over 2 centuries, fossil capitalism has poured the material foundation of society. In a matter of years, we must turn this material foundation to rubble and build something in its place. Already without historical precedent, we must take on this revolutionary task while managing the chaos of planetary destabilization and the seething reaction of a capitalist class deprived of its life source. Only a centralized democratic state has the means to transform society, absorb ecological shocks, and beat back revanchist ruling classes in the claustrophobic timeline left to prevent total Earth systems collapse. And yes, Trump's MAGA is a revanchist ruling class, or at least supports it. Therefore, the eco-socialist movement, composed of the people's majority, must take power, cut the capitalist wires, and put the state on emergency footing against the root causes of climate and ecological breakdown. Assuming the masses gain power, let us now outline the transformations that follow, assuming the masses take power. To execute the state's functions, community representatives are directly elected to the state, paid an equal living wage, and subject to a strict statute for recall as well as term limits. They're responsible for democratically planning the ecological transition and ensuring for effective, centralized coordination. Universal voting rights are guaranteed. The first order of business is democratize society by restoring the means of production to all. In the people's hands, we can produce for human and planetary needs, both advancing the material interests of the masses and healing our frayed connections with Earth. In this process of democratization, everyone has access to a purposeful, decent, self-organized job. Economic life is democratically planned in accordance with urgent ecological imperatives, and a portion of labor output is appropriated to fund universal basic services. The parochial definition of labor itself is expanded beyond wage to work, acknowledging the central importance of the reproductive and metabolic labor that sustains humanity and nature. Without the imperative of producing for capital accumulation, the working week can be shrunk, freeing up time for recreation, exploration, and leisure. Together with guaranteed vacation, the spell of productivism is broken. We can finally rediscover our creative, curious, spiritual selves. We're not promising utopia. We're offering the vision of a new world where everyone has an equal right to what they provide for society, not an equitable right attuned to the vagaries of different and thus unequal people. The latter will only come with the former's maturation and fruition. D number 2, decommodified the ecological means of survival. Under capitalism, life is commodified. To access the means of survival, people need to sell their labor power to capitalists. People receive a wage, which can be used for rent, food, and energy, and the capitalists receive surplus value, the difference between a wage and the final market price of the commodity under production. How complicated we've made that. This economic arrangement has no parallel in history. Even in the most exploitative societies, the majority of people had some customary access to the means of survival, with land far and above the most important. But through a process of primitive accumulation, people's connection to the soil was severed. Today, billions of people rely on the market for survival, a majority of which eke out an existence on less than $5 per day. Not only are people alienated from the product of their labor through surplus value extraction, but they're alienated from nature, the very basis for human survival. With production and distribution decisions democratically distributed, the following needs are decommodified. Firstly, energy. Zero carbon energy becomes a universal basic service. The energy system is rapidly electrified and transmitted through a continental supergrid, combining large-scale solar and wind with local, community-owned renewable energy. Rare earth minerals, including lithium, nickel, and cobalt, necessary for renewable energy and battery infrastructure, are sourced through just supply chains in respect of labor and indigenous rights and deployed in compliance with planetary boundaries. A mass retrofit campaign insulates homes and installs ground source heat pumps. With decision-making power transferred from fossil capitalists to the people, with an immediate moratorium is placed on all new oil, gas, coal, and fossil hydrogen projects. No drill, baby, drill. Fossil fuel production and consumption is phased out by 2030 in line with 1.5 degrees centigrade decarbonization. Workers retool fossil infrastructure into a public utility of carbon waste management. What an idea. Sucking carbon out of the air and safely burying it underground. Transport in the transport sector, mass expansion of light rail, metro, bus, cycle infrastructure, and pedestrian routes. Regional public transport is free and accessible to all. What a concept. Mass aviation is phased out and replaced with a rapid rollout of high-speed rail. In education, free, high-quality education from preschool through university is guaranteed for all. God, what a concept. Places of education are a vital source of social reproduction. They ought to be treated as such. Robust mental health care, nutritious meals, ample time for play, nature connection, and student-teacher curricula co-creation replace competitive, bureaucratized, capitalist education systems. Trade schools are fully funded to upskill an ecological workforce. Food. Food provisions are means tested, ensuring those in need have full access to regular, free, nutritious meals. The food production system is overhauled to produce for people, not profit. Agricultural corporations are broken up. Crops are diversified, seeds decommodified, and diets relocalized to make the food system more resilient, isolating food shocks brought on by an overheated planet. In addition, the land freed from a plant-based transition gives way to land-back policies and large-scale rewilding. In the process, anti-speciesism and nature connection are fostered. Housing. Having a home doesn't depend on money, status, or job. Everyone is guaranteed more than just a shelter, but a home, a comfortable space to rest, host friends, and be with family. Priorities placed on redistributing multiple homes and mass retrofit as opposed to resource-intensive new builds. Healthcare. Healthcare is a guaranteed universal human right. It is free for all, and there are low barriers to access. Health services are expanded to appropriately address mental health challenges due to widespread feelings of loneliness and alienation experienced under digital capitalism. Areas traditionally neglected can be appropriately accounted for, including trans care, elder care, reproductive health, abortion, and addiction treatments. The last D, decolonize nature, society, and the economy. Imperialism and colonialism are twin forces that have enabled centuries of capital accumulation. We must decolonize nature, society, and the economy. First, nature. Land is the oldest enclosure. Its privatization has driven the degradation of nature and health inequality. It's in the people's hands. A program of public land ownership is implemented, converting large land holdings to community trusts. This process is critical in transforming capitalist social property relations that feed on exploitation and dominate people and planet. Not only has land been enclosed, but the atmosphere has also been colonized by European fossil capitalism. A project of carbon drawdown is also underway, returning historic emissions back below fair share levels, understanding 350 parts per million as the safe limit of atmospheric CO2 concentration. Society. So police and prisons. The police were created in the late 18th and early 19th century to enable colonialism, slavery, and capitalism. They're not concerned with public safety, but with criminalizing the symptoms. For example, mental health illness, homelessness, and poverty of the exploitative systems, and cracking down on systemic resistance, most prominently labor and racial struggles. Equally, prisons are part of the repressive colonial apparatus. They continue that legacy as a carceral colonization of human bodies. No human being deserves to live in a cage, even for violent crime. Matching violence with violence only perpetuates systems of harm. With a society full of social security and widespread accessible healthcare services, police can be replaced by a new means of collective security rooted in harm reduction and care. The steady abolition of prison can also lay the seeds for a new society of common safety and well-being. Borders. Migrant justice is central to reckoning with the long history of colonialism. The influx of migrants displaced by climate and ecological breakdown are welcomed and offered full rights, including a home, healthcare, education, and a guaranteed zero-carbon, unionized job. Military. Imperial military forces are defunded, international bases shut down, and nuclear weapons disarmed. Community. A process of decolonizing capitalism's influence on social relations and community is underway. Social fear, anxiety, and individualism, that is, capitalism's social colonization, is combated by large-scale investment in public luxuries, including public parks, community theaters, leisure centers, sports facilities. In addition, expanding the commons enables a rediscovery of collective belonging, safety, and purpose. To guide the process, accessible programs of community healing that helped address compounding systems of oppression, including racism, ableism, sexism, homophobia, queerphobia, and transphobia, are deployed. Economy. Shifting power structures to serve people and planet means implementing a program of international economic decolonization. Debts are canceled, and a grant-based climate reparations are issued in line with historic responsibility and capacity to pay. Intellectual property rights are waived, enabling the transfer of low-carbon technologies that facilitate global mitigation and adaptation. Now, after all that, there is a conclusion. This is not the eco-socialist program, merely a synthesis of ideas to spark a conversation. A real program will only come to be by going to the people, asking what they need, and creating a set of policies in accordance with their ecological material interests. As a start, we invite people to submit their thoughts in this survey. They have an online survey, and write counter proposals that enrich our inchoate efforts. From the flames, we will smelt, cast, and forge the eco-socialist lantern as guide through our planetary twilight. Dawn awaits. So, yes, indeed. Well, I'm probably at the end of my time. Yes, I'm over my time. So I will stop there, ask if there are any brickbats comments. Nancy asks, who are these fantastic people that can be responsible for implementing this? Which part do you want to be responsible for? Well, to each according to their needs. And Anna L., speaking of public ownership, what if we said everything that's on and under the surface of the earth belongs to the population of the earth, not to the one who finds it first, and not to the one who happens to, and not to the one who happens to just own the land, but everyone? Just a thought exercise. Oh, gee, fully socializing the Anthropocene. What a concept. Anyway, so much for our cynicism here. If there are any other interventions, brickbats, etc., leave time for that. Otherwise, I've run over my time, and I will return programming to its just parts. Anyone? Hearing none, I will